The thing about silence is, it means different things to different species. For the Vethrani, silence is reverence. You go quiet in the presence of something holy, something ancient, something that deserves the full weight of your attention. For the Kulbari, silence is threat display. When a Kulbari goes quiet, someone is about to lose a limb. For the Dosek, silence is just Tuesday. They are famously unimpressive conversationalists. But for the combined fleet of the Galactic Accord, 47 warships arranged in a crescent formation above the pale blue marble that the locals called Earth, silence was something else entirely. Silence was fear wearing a very thin disguise. It started with a single transmission. One line. No preamble, no diplomatic header, no species identifier. It came in on every channel simultaneously, which, for the record, should have been technically impossible. Fleet Admiral Vorrakan Hesh was in the middle of a briefing on atmospheric suppression patterns when his communications officer, a young Dosek named Pleat, turned around in her seat with the specific expression of someone who has just opened a door and found something they were not expecting on the other side. She said, very quietly, "General, the humans are here." And then the silence fell. Now, I should give you some context, because context is the difference between a story and a lesson, and I am personally invested in this being both. The Galactic Accord had been watching humanity for approximately 60 of their years. 60 years of surveillance, analysis, cultural study, and what their intelligence division cheerfully called threat assessment. In 60 years, they had watched humans invent 12 new categories of weapon, survive 4 near-extinction events through what could only be described as catastrophic stubbornness, and somehow, turn a species-wide respiratory pandemic into an excuse to bake bread. The psychological reports alone filled 17 data cores. The Accord's best xenopsychologist, a 6-limbed Vethrani named Sorava, had submitted a final summary that read in its entirety, "I do not know what these creatures are, but I strongly recommend we do not anger them." Sorava had then requested early retirement. The Accord had not angered them, technically. They had simply decided to accelerate the timeline. Humanity was, in the polished language of the diplomatic briefing documents, approaching a critical threshold of interstellar capability. In the unpolished language of the actual strategy meetings, they were about to figure out they were not alone, and the Accord wanted very much to control that introduction. Control the narrative. Show up first. Look impressive. Make it clear that the galaxy had rules and humanity was expected to follow them. It was a solid plan, really, very organized. 47 warships, suppression arrays, a full diplomatic vessel with 6 translators and a catering suite, because the Accord took first contact seriously. Admiral Vorrakan Hesh had run this operation 17 times across 9 species. He was, by any measurable standard, the best in the business. He had arrived at Earth 3 days ahead of schedule, specifically to establish orbital dominance before announcing their presence. So when Pleat said, "The humans are here," Vorrakan's first instinct was to say, yes, obviously, because this is their planet. But Pleat was not looking at the planet. Pleat was looking at her sensors, and her sensors were showing him something that made his secondary hearts, the ones he had spent 40 years training to stay calm under pressure, do something deeply undignified. There were ships behind them, not in front, not rising from the planet's surface with the tentative, hopeful energy of a first contact approach. Behind, between them and the outer system, between them and home, 17 vessels of a design that did not match anything in the Accord's database, running dark until approximately 40 seconds ago, arranged with a precision that could not possibly be coincidence, because nothing about it was sloppy enough to be coincidence. They had been there in the dark, silent, waiting, and then, when they were ready, they had simply turned on. The lead human vessel was larger than Vorrakan had expected. That was the first thing he noticed. The intelligence files had shown him their generation ships, their early exploration probes, a handful of military vessels they had quietly launched over the past decade under the very thin cover story of deep space telescopy. Nothing like this. This was not a generation ship or a probe or a telescope. This was a ship built by a species that had seen war and decided to build the war a house. Its hull was not smooth. It was layered, angular, scarred in ways that did not come from construction, but from testing, from use, from the specific kind of lived-in damage that told you the people who built this had not built it for show. There were weapon emplacements along its dorsal line that Vorrakan's tactical officer, a Kulbari veteran named Drav, who had fought in the border campaigns and once stared down a dreadnought with a damaged engine, described in her official report later as, and I am quoting directly, excessive. The human ship just sat there. All 17 of them did. No communications, no posturing, no demand for surrender or acknowledgement of authority. They had positioned themselves, they had announced themselves, and then they had gone very, very still. Vorrakan had been in this business long enough to know that the most dangerous thing in a standoff was not the side that was shouting. It was the side that was not. "Open a channel," he said. And his voice only did the thing where it went slightly too low once, which he considered a personal victory. The channel opened. Static first. Then a voice. Human. Female by the cadence. Though the Accord's linguists had warned him that human gender categories were more complicated than the translation matrix implied, and he should not make assumptions. The voice was calm, not the performed calm of a diplomat or the trained calm of a soldier briefed on first contact protocols. The actual calm of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. She said, "Admiral Vorrakan Hesh, you are in unauthorized proximity to a protected biosphere. Please identify your intentions," which was, if you are keeping score at home, absolutely backwards. The Accord was the 47-ship fleet. The Accord had the suppression arrays. The Accord had the diplomatic vessel with the catering suite. The humans were supposed to be the ones explaining themselves. This was like showing up to someone's house to inform them of the new neighborhood rules and having them open the door before you knock, already holding the rulebook, already reading from it. Vorrakan's translator aide, a nervous Vethrani named Quis who had specifically requested a non-confrontational assignment after a difficult posting on the outer reaches, made a sound that was technically not a word in any language but communicated everything. "This is Admiral Vorrakan Hesh of the Galactic Accord," Vorrakan said, slowly, carefully. "We are here on behalf of the—" "We know who you are," the human voice said. Still calm, still terrifyingly, completely calm. "We have been aware of Accord surveillance operations in the system for approximately 53 years. We allowed the monitoring to continue because we wanted to understand the organization we would eventually be dealing with. We feel we now have sufficient information." The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence had been surprise. This one was the entire bridge crew of a 47-ship fleet independently processing the same piece of information, which was that humanity had not discovered they were being watched. Humanity had let themselves be watched, on purpose. Drav, who had stared down a dreadnought, turned to look at Vorrakan. Her expression was one he had never seen on her face before. He would later decide the word for it was educational. "You monitored us," Vorrakan said, "because someone had to say something." "We monitored you," the human agreed. "We found your data relay in the Kuiper Belt in year 11. We found your deep system observation platform in year 19. We found your cultural analysis probes in years 23, 31, and 44. The last one was reasonably well hidden, for the record. Your engineers are talented, a compliment." She had just complimented his engineers. Vorrakan felt something deeply wrong happening to his understanding of the situation. "Why did you not make contact?" he asked. "Because we were not ready," she said. And then, almost as an afterthought, "We are ready now." One of the human ships, a mid-size vessel on the port flank of their formation, ran a targeting scan, not a weapons lock. A scan, the kind that said, "I see everything you have, and I am making notes." Vorrakan's tactical display lit up with 63 separate sensor signatures being cataloged in real time. a level of scanning resolution that should not have been possible at that range with technology humanity was supposed to have. He was starting to see a pattern, and he did not love it. "You have us at a disadvantage," Vorrakan said. Because that was simply true, and Vorrakan had not survived 40 years in the field by pretending things that were true were not. "Yes," the human said. "We thought that was appropriate, given the circumstances." Vorrakan looked at his screen. He looked at the 17 ships. He looked at the formation that had materialized out of empty space like it had always been there, like the darkness itself had decided to have opinions. He thought about Sorava's retirement request. He thought about 60 years of surveillance data. He thought about all the briefing documents and threat assessments and psychological profiles, and the 17 data cores, and the conclusion that had somehow, at every level of the Accord's considerable intelligence apparatus, been filed under concerns rather than immediate action. He thought about the fact that somewhere on that lead human ship, there was a person who had known he was coming, had watched him set up his suppression arrays, had waited until he was committed, and had then turned on 17 lights in the dark and said hello. "My name is Commander Yael Oduya," the human said, because she had apparently decided the silence had lasted long enough. "I represent the Earth Defense Compact. I think we should talk." Vorrakan looked at Pleat. Pleat looked at him with the expression of someone who had very much not signed up for this. "Yes," Vorrakan said, "I think we should." The diplomatic vessel was Vorrakan's idea, and he would later consider it either his best decision of the day or his worst, depending on which part of the meeting he was thinking about. The catering suite had been stocked for a standard first contact. Nutrient pastes calibrated for 17 known biological profiles, temperature-controlled serving units, a full atmospheric regulation system that could adjust the room's composition in real time. The Accord's diplomatic corps had thought of everything. They were very proud of their catering suite. It had never failed them. Commander Yael Oduya arrived with 4 people, no environmental suits, and what Vorrakan could only describe as comfortable shoes. Not dress shoes, not military boots, something in between, worn at the edges, the kind of footwear that said, "I have walked a great many distances and I expect to walk more." He found this detail profoundly unsettling and could not immediately explain why. Her team was small and, on the surface, unremarkable. There was a tall, quiet man she introduced as Dr. Fenwick Aborisade, who carried a data tablet and never once looked down at it during the entire meeting, which meant he was either memorizing everything in real time or he had already memorized everything before arriving, and neither option was restful. There was a younger woman named Priya Solis who had the specific energy of someone who found every single thing around her interesting and was very good at not showing it. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging, measuring, the way Vorrakan's best intelligence officers moved their eyes, except she was apparently a linguist. There was a compact, broad-shouldered man named Ren Takahashi, who had been introduced as a structural engineer and who spent the first 10 minutes of the meeting examining the walls of the diplomatic vessel with the professional curiosity of someone mentally calculating load tolerances. And there was an older woman, gray-haired, unhurried, who had been introduced simply as Madame Vire, with no title and no explanation, and who settled into her chair across from Vorrakan's senior staff, with the comfortable authority of someone who had been the most dangerous person in every room she had ever entered, and had simply gotten used to it. Quis, Vorrakan's translator aide, leaned close and whispered that he could not find Madame Virat in any of the human personnel databases the Accord had compiled. Vorrakan nodded slowly and decided not to bring it up. Oduya began without ceremony. She placed a single device on the table between them, flat, dark, no visible controls, and said, "We would like to propose a framework." Drav, who was present as tactical advisor, and who had spent the journey over from the flagship in a state of focused silence that her colleagues recognized as her processing mode, said, "Before frameworks, I have a question. The ships, the formation, you were waiting for us specifically, or for you specifically," Oduya said. "We tracked your fleet from the moment it entered the outer system. Admiral Hesh's vessel has a very distinctive engine signature. Our records go back to his campaign in the Dinvari corridor 14 years ago. We have been following his career with some interest. Vorrakan felt the specific sensation of being studied by something that had decided, long ago, to be patient about it. He had given this sensation to others. He had not previously been on the receiving end. It was instructive. "You have files on me," he said. "We have files on everyone in the Accord's senior military structure," Oduya said pleasantly. "We have files on the Accord's Economic Council, its judicial body, its colonial administration. We have translated approximately 60% of your public legal code, and we have questions about several of the articles pertaining to pre-contact species rights, which is actually one of the things we wanted to discuss today." The room absorbed this. Soreva, Vorrakan thought. Soreva had been right. He was going to find her retirement cottage and personally apologize. Dr. Aborisad, still not looking at his tablet, said, "Specifically Article 7, subsection 12, which grants the Accord administrative authority over pre-contact species pending full integration review. We consider that article inapplicable to our situation, and we would like that formally acknowledged before we discuss anything else." Vorrakan's legal attaché, a methodical Vethrani named Kassav, who had been in the diplomatic corps for 30 years and had never once been surprised by anything, was surprised. He opened his mouth, he closed it, he looked at his own documents. He said very carefully, "That article is standard Accord procedure for all first contact situations." "We are aware," Aborisad said. "We are saying it does not apply. We are not a pre-contact species. We are a contacted species that chose the timing of formal contact. The legal distinction is meaningful." It was in fact meaningful. It was the kind of meaningful that would tie the Accord's administrative and legal apparatus into structured arguments for years. Vorrakan looked across the table at Aborisad, at the tablet he never looked at, and thought, they did not bring a linguist and a structural engineer and a woman with no name in the files to a first contact meeting. They brought a legal strategist, an intelligence analyst, an infrastructure specialist, and whatever Madame Virat was. This was not a diplomatic team. This was an opening argument. Oduya let the silence sit for exactly long enough. And then she said, "We are not here to be adversarial. I want to be clear about that. We have spent a long time learning about the Accord, and our assessment is that it is, broadly, a functional and reasonably ethical governing body, with some historical exceptions, and a procurement process that needs serious reform." She said this last part the way someone says something they have wanted to say out loud for a long time. "We are interested in a relationship. We are not interested in a hierarchy." "The Accord does not operate outside a hierarchical structure," Vorrakan said. Because this was true, and because it felt important to say. "We know," Oduya said. "We are prepared to be flexible about how our membership is structured, provided certain conditions are met." Madame Virat spoke for the first time. Her voice was unhurried, low, the kind of voice that rooms automatically arranged themselves around. She said, "The colonies." One word. The whole table shifted. Because the Accord had colonies, 43 of them, across 12 systems, representing species that had been integrated over the past 2 centuries, with varying degrees of willingness and varying degrees of success. It was not a secret. It was also not something the Accord's diplomatic teams typically encountered as an opening position from a species that had been watching from a distance for 60 years and had clearly formed opinions. "You want assurances about our colonial policies," Vorrakan said. "We want more than assurances," Madame Virat said. "We want seats on the Administrative Review Council, plural. And we want those seats before integration, not after." Kassav made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of 30 years of diplomatic experience encountering something that had not been in any of the briefing documents. Ren Takahashi, who had been quietly examining the ceiling fixtures with the gaze of someone who had found something structurally interesting, said, without looking down, For what it's worth, your atmospheric regulation system is impressive. The heat distribution in this room is excellent. Did you design the circulatory grid in-house, or is that contracted? Kasov stared at him. Drav stared at him. Quis, the nervous translator aide who had not signed up for this, made a very small sound. Takahashi looked at them, apparently genuine. I ask because we have been working on something similar for our deep station installations, and the heatsink problem is… Ren, Oduya said. Right, Takahashi said, and returned to looking at the ceiling. It was, Vorrakan thought, either the most disarming thing he had ever witnessed in a diplomatic setting, or it was a technique. He was increasingly unable to tell the difference, and he suspected that was the point. The meeting continued for 4 hours. By the end of the second hour, Kasov had stopped looking surprised and started looking the way he looked when he was writing new legal frameworks in his head. By the end of the third, Drav had asked Oduya 3 direct questions about human tactical doctrine that Oduya had answered with a candor that left Drav quiet and thoughtful in the specific way she got quiet and thoughtful before revising a significant assumption. By the end of the 4th hour, they had agreed on nothing formally and understood everything clearly, which was, in Vorrakan's experience, the best outcome a first meeting could produce. As the human team prepared to leave, Vorrakan walked Oduya to the docking connection. It was habit, courtesy, and also the thing you do when you want one more unrecorded moment, he said. The 53 years, watching us, waiting. Was there ever a point where you considered making contact sooner? Oduya thought about it. Actually thought about it. The way people do when they are not reaching for a prepared answer. Yes, she said. About 20 years ago. We had a faction that wanted to reach out, establish something quiet and preliminary, start the conversation early. What stopped them? She looked at him, and there was something in it that was not quite humor and not quite sorrow, something in between. We watched you integrate the Tessari. We decided we wanted to know more before we decided who we were dealing with. The Tessari integration was not in the Accord's public record. It was in the sealed administrative files of a council that had since been restructured. The fact that Oduya said it plainly, named it, and watched his face while she named it, told him everything he needed to know about what 60 years of watching had actually produced. He said, "And now, you have decided?" "We have decided," she said, "that you are worth talking to, which is not the same as decided you are trustworthy. But it's a start." She extended her hand. Humans did this. The Accord's cultural briefings had covered it. Vorrakan took it. Her grip was firm. Not demonstrative, not a test, just present. The grip of someone who had shaken hands with people she trusted and people she did not, and treated both the same, because her hands did not give that away. She smiled. It reached her eyes. He had read enough about human facial expression to know that this one was real. "We'll be in touch, Admiral." Then she was gone, back through the docking collar, back to the ship that had materialized out of darkness, and Vorrakan stood in the corridor of his very impressive diplomatic vessel with its excellent catering suite and its award-winning atmospheric regulation system, and thought about 53 years of deliberate patience and a species that had found his surveillance equipment in year 11 and said nothing, nothing at all, just watched back, learned, waited, built, until the day they decided they were ready and then appeared, fully formed, behind 47 warships like a question the galaxy had not known it was being asked. He thought about Article 7, Subsection 12. He thought about Madame Vera. He thought about Priya Solis cataloging the room with her eyes, and Aborisad never once looking at his tablet. He walked back to the bridge. Pleat looked up at him. "Well," she said. Vorrakan sat down. He looked out at the dark, at the 17 human ships still sitting precisely where they had always been, patient, present, unhurried. "Send a full report to the Council," he said. "Priority transmission. Tell them first contact is complete." He paused. "Tell them it went about as well as we deserved." Pleat opened her mouth, closed it, started typing. Outside, the human ships turned, slowly in perfect formation, and pointed themselves toward a sun that was just beginning to rise over the edge of a pale blue marble, and waited, the way they had always waited for whatever came next. They had all the time in the world. They had always known that